And this is a real good example of intensity over the amount of weight. And I have said this until I'm blue in the face. He could go heavier, but the
Oh yeah,
intensity is just at an insane level. And why or how does a muscle adapt? It adapts to a stimulus that it's not used to.
yeah,
So he's providing a stimulus that is going to shock the legs.
yep.
And what's the outcome? Ridiculous growth in already great quads as a pro.
I'll say right now, between me and Andrew, we're actually continuing after Toronto for like 2 weeks. I'm in really good shape right now, so I'm only like 2 pounds above stage weight.
Nice.
Andrew wants to play with the peak again, so he wants to like we pulled out growth hormone, and he just wants to try to like play with some things and see if we can even get a better look. So,
Okay.
which I'm for, and obviously, I'll say this: it's definitely hard because I know I could eat food right now, and
Sure.
it's like a show. You're like, even I'm eating like 450 grams of carbs, but like I'm starving. You know what I mean? Like post show, you know how it goes. It's like you could eat everything in sight. Um, so I'm really proud of myself though for being like really diligent and staying on track. But we also, like I said, we kept all the orals in, kept all the prep cycle in. We just pulled the growth hormone out, and so like either this weekend or like midweek, we're gonna like try to do like a mock peak, I guess, you know what I mean, to sort of play with some things and see if we can, at least this way we can push it without the risk, right? So
Yeah.
I don't think people understand the discipline it takes to do that.
yeah, it's tough,
Phew.
Really, I mean, your show is done.
right?
We all want to learn, but do we want to learn and continue the grind only to peak and not show it, not be able to see that? Yes, it's a learning process. Don't get me wrong. It's the professional thing to do. That all we can talk about it and we can justify it and explain it away, but the show is done, man. You don't have a show in sight. You're like, just give me some reprieve here, bro.
Yeah. I guess we kind of already started the show. This is the show then.
I
We're doing
know.
it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was asking Nate questions. I should have waited, guys. Thanks for tuning in to the next episode of Blood, Sweat, and Gear. We've got IFBB Pro Nate Spear, and I'm going to say the one of the OGs of online coaching. If you hate online coaches, you can blame Skip for having started
That's
it all.
right.
Skip Hill. Of course, I'm Scott
It's
McNally.
all his fault.
And all of our programming is brought to you by you guys. Thank you, everybody at Patreon. We do have some Patreon questions today. And thank you to TrueNutrition.com. Use our code Think over there. Let me know if you have any questions about them. So we are getting in talking about your show, Nate. And we're going to talk about we're going to talk about basically growing legs. We just had Turner on the other week, and man, that was a fun talk. Like going back and talking about Turner in the day, just doing whatever it took to just have the craziest leg workouts. I want to hear from you. You made some tremendous progress with your legs, especially just in this past year, even. But before we did, you mentioned you guys are going to do another test peak, and you mentioned. So you've kept everything in after the Toronto Pro, and we're just a few days, 4 days, 5 days post of that now. You pulled growth hormone though now, and you said you're going to try to peak again. What's the reasoning here with the GH? How does that fit into the picture with this test?
I think so for Toronto, it was like about 9 days ago, but it was
a little longer then.
Yeah, but it was still like a really great look that we brought. And as far as like peaking goes, thought we were like pretty much there. But maybe Andrew saw something looking back that maybe we could try something different. And I think a lot of it too was sparked his interest because I sort of put my foot in my mouth and I was like, yeah, I'm so motivated. Like I don't want any food. And like I had some stuff obviously, but like not my normal self, I was much better behaved than ever before. And I sort of voiced that to him when you got turning, and he was like, "Oh, okay, well, maybe we can." I think that he started thinking a little bit more like, "Okay, if he can stay strict, then you know what I mean. We can try to play with some things." But I think he just wanted to play with like a drier look. I guess. I mean, I thought it was pretty dang dry. My hamstrings were like corded, and glutes were like really dry and boxed out, and lower back there's nothing there. So But yeah, I mean, if anything, honestly, this is where sometimes like this is where I let him do his thing, even though sometimes he's very like apt to say, "Oh, like we go back and forth and stuff like that." But I try not to do that. You know what I mean? But in my opinion, honestly, I thought we probably could have actually pushed food harder
Hmm.
and maybe a little fuller. We were pretty conservative. Like the thing was like it's so this is why bodybuilding is so fun and interesting. But like, so I was at my lightest pretty much this whole prep for the show,
Hmm.
but we felt like we were plenty full, because for me, I have a different body type. So when I get flat, I just get harder and drier. And you know what I mean? It doesn't really look like I'm flat. So a lot of people are like when I got to Toronto and I took some pictures and posted them like, oh, you're lasting full. And I'm like, actually, I'm the lightest I've been this whole prep. You know what I
Huh.
mean? And we've really been like, so we really wanted to like, I think we figured that out going into the whole week. Like, okay, we can just sort of like coast on this look because it's such a good look where we're at. And then just sort of like feed up a little bit Friday or
Yeah.
Saturday, Sunday show. We did do a burger and fries the night before the show, which actually worked out great because we had already done it like 3 or 4 times at that point when I was in shape. So we already sort of knew the response, right? So it's
Right.
not like we just
Yeah.
went there and had a burger and fries in, but I was responding so well to it, and like the waist was super tight the next day, no digestion issues, everything was great. So we did that, and then like we kept water in the whole time, and yeah, it was just a really good look. But I guess in my opinion, I thought we probably could have ate a little more because we were a little conservative. Because like I said, my look looked like I was like full and hard, but my weight was my lightest. You know what I'm saying? So it sort of tells me like there probably could have been some wiggle room. But we
Real tough
also,
problem. Real tough problem to have, right, Skip? Like when I get
Well,
flat,
yeah,
I just
but
look harder and we're incredible.
yeah.
When I get
Yeah,
flat,
it is-
people wonder if I'm a bodybuilder. They're like, "Oh, did you quit lifting?"
Right. There's mere mortals on the left side of the screen,
Yeah.
and then there's Nate. It is on the one hand, you're right, Scott, and I agree with you. On the other hand, I do, and I know you do too, Scott. You understand where he's coming from. This is a
Oh, yeah.
very nuanced, especially at that level. The most subtle changes, and the most it can make a pretty dramatic difference. And there's very little separating each placing. You
Yeah.
go to the amateur, stage, whether it be state or regional. I mean, you got to get really up to nationals before you start to see those small changes really matter. Like you make a bad decision, or a different decision. Maybe it's not necessarily bad. Maybe you're just I was coming in fuller this time instead of just as dry.
yeah,
I'm going to go on record. I wasn't going to, but with my opinion, and I'm gonna. I have to preface this because I don't want anybody listening getting pissed at me. Number one, Nate and Andrew are a winning combination, and they fucking get it right. They're playing around, they're learning, even with the peaking after the show. It doesn't get any more professional than that.
Yeah.
It just clearly says that you're kind of a student of the game, and so is Andrew. I was impressed with the fullness, and that's just a visual. I understand that your weight may have been lighter. I had no way to know that. I
yeah,
honestly, if you mentioned your weight, I didn't even pay attention to. I was just going for the visual.
Yeah.
But I have to wonder this because of your reputation of being so dry.
Mm-hmm.
If the change to being fuller, and arguably it could have been a better look, but it may not have been expected, and it may have gone against you that small, very small difference in dryness to get the fullness went against you. Almost like the judge was like, oh, he's a little off. When to
yeah,
everybody else and for everybody else's condition, you're not a little off.
yeah,
But that dryness not being as crisp as it normally, and it wasn't, it made no mistake. It wasn't like you were off.
right,
And arguably, I remember seeing the picture. Thought he's fuller. This is the pro level. This is more of a pro condition.
right,
Yeah.
The difference. It's Victor Martinez. I mean, I'm going kind of old school, or even Jay Cutler, where if you really did their, calipered their skin, it's not going to come. It's not going to register as and calipers are not accurate, but a 3% or something like that. they still have the pros. I think still have thicker skin, better collagen, it's younger looking skin, and it works with the shape and the fullness big
Right.
time. I think, and I don't know, I posit that Andrew is playing with the GH to see, number one, if you would give up any fullness without it, but if
Mm-hmm.
you'd be drier. And it may be so subtle that to the untrained eye, you're not even going to really see a difference. But you,
Mhm.
Andrew, myself, Scott, guys who know the game and are in it at that level, there may be a difference there. And if it's as simple as pulling the growth hormone, well, that's a pretty easy
Right.
fix there
Yeah.
too. And
Right.
you
Yeah.
make a good point, Nate. No question. Maybe because we all know this too. There's only the only difference between fat and flat is one letter. The look,
Yeah.
and I'm being kind of melodramatic with that statement because obviously no one looks fat. But when you're not full, typically most people aren't as hard. You may be the exception to the rule on that, but it's possible still that you could have been even harder. And for for the listeners, the reason is just it's simple. A muscle that is tight and pushing against the skin is going to make the skin appear thinner
Sure.
versus a flatter muscle. So um, yeah, there's some things to play with in there, but this is the game, like you said. It's a constant learning thing, and you could do the same. You could have a great prep, do the same prep for the next show 9 weeks later, and the outcome isn't going to be the same. That's why what we do it's just far more nuanced than most people think. Oh, this worked, so I'll do this again and it'll work, and that's just not how it goes. It's a constant evolution of dealing with a myriad of variables that change, if not weekly, every 3 or 4 weeks too, or show to show.
All
Well, to
right.
touch on what you were saying real quick about like the amateur and like different levels, like at the pro level, like if you peak like 2% better, like dude, that can make a difference between first call out, top five. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So it's sort of like, yeah, it's good to know and play with that kind of stuff at this level because like everyone's so good, right? So it's like those little percentages are gonna like separate you from the pack. Even
Right.
just like certain detail or a certain extra like lines that you didn't that catches the judge's eyes, you know what I mean? Like and
Mhm.
at the pro that makes a difference between like, oh shoot, I saw this like certain detail, we're gonna put him in first call up now or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it's a good lesson too for listeners to hear that you don't always have to go up a weight class to get better. You can get better at the same weight. You can get better at a lighter weight. It's not always about, oh, I need to step up to the next weight class. As we were talking before, Scott pushed the button about that. And that it's just sometimes it's just a bad approach. You can get too big in the sense that it doesn't fit your frame very well, and you can start gaining that weight in other places. I've said time and time again, if you add 4 inches to your back chest measurement, but you add 3 to your
Right.
waist measurement, that's not a fair trade.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, let's talk some wheels. Nate, overall, you've made some great progress in the last year. You grow in your
There's a
legs.
gross understatement.
Yeah. And you were already, at a high level. Can you talk to us about what you've learned about leg training, especially like in the last year?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that I learned was just load isn't everything. So the biggest thing I went back and sort of changed was just that the first thing didn't matter to me was like the weight, right? So more so like range of motion, perfect tempo, finding machines that I could get that range of motion because there's some machines where, especially being a bigger guy or not very flexible or whatever, like I can't free bar squat and activate my quads the way I would like to,
Huh.
just because like my mobility will never be that good. Whereas like if I do a pendulum or a hack squat, it's like I can get very deep. I can like my butt doesn't come off the pad. You know what I mean? Like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and like I use a lot of intensifiers too, so I think that really helped. And like I don't do a lot of straight sets to build my legs, meaning like so we'll do like I like 15, 20 reps. Like I like
Hmm.
um, constant tension. I like burning them out. You know what I mean? Like all that kind of stuff. Whereas like maybe if I'm training chest or back, it's a little bit more progressive overload style, or maybe just straight sets. You know what I mean? Whereas I think quads, I just had to sort of figure out what worked for me. And I think that's like a take home for people at home is like, even if I say all this stuff, maybe it won't work for you, but maybe you need to go to the back to the drawing board and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and analyze yourself as far as like, okay, I think a lot of people are not good at humbling themselves sometimes. And they're like, yeah, it might have worked up to that point, but
Yeah.
maybe there's a better method. And a lot of times I've seen guys, they don't really adapt very well, meaning like, oh, I'm a progressive overload guy, or I'm a push pull legs guy, or you know what I mean? Whereas like, why can't we have a little bit of whatever works, you know what I mean, for us? So,
Mm-hmm.
whereas like quads, I'll say it's like lower volume as far as like the training window. So like, honestly, it takes us like an hour to an hour and a half to train quads, you know what I mean? Because it's so brutal.
Hmm.
So like, there's a point where you're just like, okay, like I'm done, you know? But to put it into like pretty much the quad workout that I've been doing the last like year or two, as I always start with quad extensions. And for me, I'll do 20 reps all the way up. And then we do a rest pause set at the end. So we'll do like 3 rounds of like 10 or 12 where we fail with like 10 seconds in between. And then after that, our quads are just fried. So I think a lot of people get in their heads as far as like, we're bodybuilding, right? So a lot of guys would be like, but am I going to lose my strength on my hack squat because I did
Right.
extensions first and have a crazy pump? It's like, that's where you're thinking wrong. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I'm thinking about the load or, uh, you know, the weight per se. How can I make this as hard as possible, fill the blood up there as much as possible, and also like target that outer sweep too. So a big thing that really helped me too that I got from John Meadows was like that's what I'm saying is like you got to figure out what works for you. So for me to get my sweeps to develop, I did the opposite of like what most people do, which most people will say toes straight forward, close stance. Whereas for me, I get in the best position to get the deepest range of motion and the most flexion and stretch on my quad sweep, which would be more of like a duck stance, shoulder width apart, toes out, where I can really sit in the hole and I'm going to have an optimal stretch on my quad. Whereas if my feet are straight forward, that the hips get in the way, the knees get in the way, right? Like I'm thinking on like leg press,
Okay.
where you're not going to be able to stretch, you know, that outside quad sweep, which I think has been huge for me developing my quads, like right there, right? So
Yeah.
like before, maybe a couple of years ago, I got to do 10 plates, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
I'm doing half the weight, right? But my legs are way better. Whereas like, okay, I got to do 10 plates, but the range of motion will be more like here, you know what I mean? Or what have you.
Yeah.
Whereas like now it's like here, right?
Right.
But this is the quad getting fully stretched now. Whereas before, you see what I'm saying? That quad wasn't getting the full as deep of a stretch on that outside sweep as you could. Where for me, I think that's where a lot of blood is getting driven into now. And it's really helped me like develop more sweep and hang on that like lower quad outside, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
I think that
Um,
range of motion is huge. And I
yeah,
think that's what's missed on the depth as far as range of motion. The more that we all know that, you know, any muscle, let me make sure I phrase this correctly. The more muscle fibers fire from the stretched position. So when you're able to get that range of motion, and you have to be able to get that range of motion without having vulnerabilities from tight hips and everything else. There's a lot that factors into this, but you're able to do that without your hips rolling and everything else. And it's funny because you touched on something that I think is very important, and I think it's an archaic or antiquated way to look at foot position and knee position. It used to be forever and ever, hallelujah, that the knees being forward hit the outer quads better. But
Oh
that is
yeah.
such a huge it's a misnomer. It's
yeah,
just not correct. It's also a huge vulnerability for the lower back.
right.
It's just hard when you have those knees in front of you. I just think to myself, how did people do that back in the day for years
Right.
without lower back problems? It blows my mind how they were able to do that. So if you don't have those vulnerabilities through tight hip flexors and your hips rolling posterior, which basically means you can't have your hips coming off the pad in the bottom position.
Yeah.
And there's a lot that goes on there. It's hamstring flexibility. It's actually even ankle flexibility.
I was going to say that. I think his ankles, like where he's at this bottom right here, I feel like his ankles are more flexible than mine are.
Yeah. And I think it's funny to see the progression. It's cool, not haha funny. It's cool to see the progression with leg training over the last 10, 12 years. It's not even just leg training. I guess it's all training in general. There's so much more of a divide now between bodybuilding training and strength or powerlifting training. And I think this is huge because we're getting away from these big lifts that arguably, in my opinion, and it's not because I have world-class wheels that I can say this, but the clients that I've worked with and me being in the industry for so long and then putting my training on top of it, I'm going to go on record and I'm going to irritate a lot of people by saying this because I always do when I say this, especially on Elite FTS for years. But I think that squatting is highly overrated for quad development. I've always thought that from a younger age, and now that we're starting to see more of a divide and a separation between hypertrophy training and strength training, arguably bodybuilding and more strength focus, you can see the development. I mean, Nate's only one example, but there are numerous examples of that methodology changing where it's more of, like you said, rep tempo. It's, we see guys in the gym, I do, I'm sure you guys see it too, where you got some skinny kids putting up some decent numbers that you wouldn't expect if you saw them walking around. But there's a 5-second delay after every 2, maybe 3 reps. Maybe there's a 10-second delay. And it's just almost like, what are you doing? I think squatting is a good example. If you're going to squat or you're going to do hack squats or even the pendulum, I think it should be what I call piston reps.
Can we talk about this set happening right here that we're watching right now? Like, this is freaking nasty. Yeah. We're on like a 4th drop, I think. And
fires that I'm telling you, like, and I'm like walking away. I'm like, bye.
It looked like I'm going to roll this one back. So I don't know how many plates you got on there, 8 maybe, something like that. And you're about to fail, like literally fail, and then they lift the sled back up, right? That's what I think I saw here. Yeah. So you needed some help to just get it back up, and now you're going to rack it, and 1 plate down, and you're going to keep going. So this set right here, is this like your main set? This is the one set for this exercise? I'm asking.
He may be locked up.
Oh.
Because he hasn't moved for a couple seconds.
He's just holding still.
Yeah. Until he comes back in, I'm going to guess that it has to be.
Yeah.
And this is a real good example of intensity over the amount of weight. And I have said this until I'm blue in the face. He could go heavier, but the intensity is just at an insane level. And why or how does a muscle adapt? It adapts to a stimulus that it's not used to.
Yeah.
So he's providing a stimulus that is going to shock the legs.
Yep. And
what's the outcome? Ridiculous growth in already great quads as a pro.
He's back. Nate, is this like your one set? Are you only doing like one working set for this exercise? Did we lose him again?
Okay. Wi-Fi is going to my bad.
That's all right.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. What were you saying?
Is this just like one working set? Is that all you're doing here?
Yeah. So we already did like probably, I would say, one top set before that.
Okay.
Like failed, just straight set, like, and then we probably did one that was like mildly working set before that, right? So.
Okay.
Like when we just sort of keep adding plates, right? And then like I would say 6 plates is like, okay, we're working, but like mildly, right?
Yeah.
And then I mean the biggest thing is like how can I make it as hard as possible with everything perfectly mechanically and the intensity has to be super high. So I don't want people to confuse like obviously we just saw right there, but like sometimes people get it confused like, oh, less load means less intensity, you
Yeah.
know, or but obviously we know that's different, but like some people out there might misconstrue that. But like just because the weight on there is a little bit less does not mean the intensity is. If anything, the intensity is higher now
Right.
because of the intensifiers we're doing and making the reps as hard as possible. You know what I mean? So
You can control the weight a lot more. You know what I mean? When you're not just trying to like hold on for dear life, you know, and get through the set. You take whatever weight you can just hold on for dear life and reduce that by 15%, you know, and now it's like, let me really own this. And that's, I think, exactly, you know, what you're doing there is just freaking owning that weight. I think that's the biggest thing I'm seeing. People, the new guys, I should say, that have come to work with me that are doing very limited amount of volume on a body part. I don't know. Do you guys see this too? I'll have somebody who says, yeah, I'm doing like top set, back off set. And they're not generating enough power or intensity in the minimum working sets they have. It's like, in that case, I'm not going to fault somebody because I feel like, you know, it's a learning process and not everybody is there, but
Sure.
maybe that guy needs just more volume than to make up for it to, you know, as best he can.
I think
Yeah,
sometimes
the ability, or whether someone has the ability to generate that intensity. I mean, that was the core um, ideology or methodology for DC training, where you can't use this because you haven't been in it long enough, which only made everybody want to use it anyway. Um, but a lot of people would come back years later and say, and I know I still get it from clients, they'll be like, you know, I tried DC training years ago, it didn't work, but I went back to it and I realized that I was able to generate the intensity after I had more years in the gym. And nothing is truer from a training standpoint. So, you know, it's a tough thing. At least the clients that you're talking about, Scott, they still have they're focused on recovery and they're focused on not doing like wasting sets or wasting reps or wasting time in the gym. That I can appreciate. But if you aren't able to generate the intensity,
right.
then that's a situation where you may want to take the volume up a little bit to try to make up for it. Obviously, you can build in the intensity, but that's not always a psychological game in the early years. It's
Yeah.
the ability to actually get that muscle to contract past, you know, people say, well, I went to failure. You went to failure, but it's just not the same. Give yourself another 3 years and we'll talk about that failure again.
Yeah. And one thing, when I had that chance to go talk with Dave Tate, one thing that really stood out to me, we talked a little bit about this, and he was saying the younger guys that are newer don't have that experience, that if you tell them to go like all out, they're going to use literally every single muscle they have in their entire body to get that to happen. You know, they don't have the skill yet to be able to do what Nate did. Because I watched you, Nate, and that's the difficult thing, is when it hurts, like the pain of the set is so great that, but at the same time, you're still using the target muscle and still using the control that you want to use to the best of your ability, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely a big difference maker. And like you were, I mean, I was just chiming in with Skip because it's like, I would say the problem is like there's like trends going on, right? So like push pull legs was hot like a couple years ago. Now the top set back off set is like sort of hot right now, but it's like there's not a whole lot of people, like even like experienced people, you know, they leave stuff on the table even though they might not think that.
Mhm.
Um, like okay, well you probably need a little bit more volume if you're not progressing with that style of training. And like some of my clients, I will pad a little bit of volume on there just for insurance, you know what I mean,
Yeah.
where it's like okay, like I feel safer, I'm not over voluming you, but like just a little bit more, maybe an intensifier here and there just to like for insurance to make sure that they are getting like the most bang for the buck. Because like let's be real, I mean we have a lot of clients that you're sort of like, I know you train hard, but like, you know what I mean, is it like that?
Yep.
You said yourself, I remember, because we had this conversation before, by the way, how did you grow your legs? You know, because you made incredible leg progress a year or two back. And we brought you on and we talked about it. And you said then the number one thing you realized is that you're not Dorian Yates. Back then you said, I'm not Dorian. I can't get everything out of one set like he did. Then I needed, you at the time you said I needed a little bit more, a little bit more volume to be able to get everything I could.
And that's like a good teaching tool too, because how many of us want to sit with our ego and pride and say, hey, maybe I'm not the hardest training guy out there, because everyone wants to be, right? So it's
right.
Like, to be a better athlete, you got to be realistic with yourself sometimes and say, hey, I can step up my training, but I'm never going to be Dorian Yates. So, you know what I mean? I have to make a training program that's going to suit sort of my needs and my abilities, right?
Yeah. In the end, it comes down to progress. I used to love to say, I want to be I'm not going to be the strongest. I'm not going to be the biggest, but I want to be the hardest working guy in the room. And I've actually had to change that because I don't have the recovery ability to be the hardest training guy in the room. That's just looking back on it, it's kind of a dumb I understand why I made it.
Sure.
I made it because I can't beat them here and I can't beat them here. So I'm going to outwork them. And this is not a sport, in my opinion. This is not a sport where you're going to outwork someone. You have too many people who are genetically gifted that still will train their asses off. Don't get me wrong, but they'll do everything right. And if you think you're going to outwork them with less superior genetics, you got another thing to learn, bro.
Like Brandon Curry, he told us, about going to Oxygen Gym. He was like, you just think, well, how did it work? They just threw more and more volume at you. And you either have good enough genetics to keep recovering from it, or you fall by the wayside and leave Oxygen Gym and don't train there anymore.
Home.
Yeah.
You get a one-way ticket back home.
Brandon, that was funny because he said too, he was like, I used to always listen to all the podcasts, and everybody always talked about how they needed to be careful about not overtraining. And then I realized I might be different. I might not have to worry about that.
Right.
3-hour leg workouts till you puke. But I mean, come on, we all want to do that stuff. At least if you're listening to this show, you probably do.
It can be a stimulus that can create growth. Again, where does progress happen? It happens based on a stimulus that muscle is not used to, and then it has to adapt. Then it comes down to frequency. I bust my clients all the time. They'll tell me, oh yeah, well, I've been doing this and I've been doing drop sets and everything. How long have you been doing that? Oh, probably 7-8 weeks. If half of your sets are drop sets or the rest pause or the supersets, and especially if you're in a caloric deficit, it's a matter of time. If you're not already spinning your wheels and tiptoeing on that line of overtraining, you're going to be over that line, and then you're going to be trying to dig yourself out of a hole, because anybody who overtrains does not want to pull back and lower their training frequency and volume and intensity to be able to get out of that hole. So the hole just continues to get dug deeper and deeper.
Yeah.
Right.
So we've got some topics. We had one about SEO. Before we did, guys, we want to do things a little bit different around here, around these parts. Everybody has been loving Skip's word of the day. And there's been a problem with it. We talked about this, and here's the problem. Skip gives us his word of the day at the end, if we remember, and then we're done, and we don't get a chance to use the word. So I thought, why don't we move word of the day till after our topic, and that way we still have like our Q&A segment, and we can try to work the word of the day in. I want to try to use this word, whatever it is.
But you know me, I'm going to complicate it.
Okay.
Complicate everything, right? But there's a little bit there's a method to the madness, okay?
Okay.
The word itself is banal.
Banal?
Yeah.
Like
and
banal?
I used it the other day in a post on Facebook, and got a couple people messaging me. I've never heard that word before, but I looked it up. That's cool.
Is it like banal? Is it the
banal? Or you can say it a couple different ways, but that's the way I say it because I think it's the most accepted way to say it. But here's the thing. There are a handful of adjectives that are very, very close to banal. You guys heard the word vapid?
Yes.
Okay, very, very similar. Arguably, and this is why I'm giving a few of these, because they're so close that they can almost be used interchangeably. They're synonyms, but with just very, very subtle changes. Insipid. I think I've already used that.
That was one of our words.
Right.
Yeah.
And trite. So these four are so close together that you can almost use them interchangeably. So I'm going to give you the kind of the definition of what they are, and you'll see how close they are. Banal is just lacking originality, pretty much so as to be obvious. So if someone says something in a political statement and they say something that you've heard a million times, and it's just cliche.
Yeah.
It's banal. So vapid is very close too, and that's just offering nothing stimulating or challenging, like say in a debate or a discussion. So it's pretty close. Insipid, no distinct or interesting qualities. Insipid can also be used when you're talking about something that's essentially lacking flavor, which is what we're talking about, like a food that is insipid. But it's typically used, I don't think it's used for food very often. It's used just to kind of clarify that you're not bringing anything to the table. There's no difference. There's nothing in what you're saying that's any different than anybody else has said. And trite is one of my favorite words.
Wait, so which is the word then? Are these all the words?
It's overused. It's just something that's overused, or it's lacking originality. So if you make a comment that is, again, cliche, they're all four of those are very, very close. So they can almost be used interchangeably.
Okay. So are they all the word though, or is banal the main word?
Banal is, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Banal.
And I think I use banality or something like
banality? That. Oh, I never heard that term before.
But it fit. I can't remember what it was about. The post was about, and you guys can relate to this, how as soon as someone disagrees with your perspective on anything on the internet, you're a troll.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So then come the snowflake comments, or they inject political, like they must know your political affiliation at that point, because you're not against LGBTQ, so you're a snowflake and you're a Democrat. I mean, it becomes this very trite. The responses are trite, or they're banal. That person is acting. That's a vapid person who is coming back with those types of things, and the discussion becomes insipid. It lacks any real, any distinct qualities or any different than any other conversation on the internet where people are attacked for, and assumptions are made based on that response, which is funny because I'm very pro LGBTQ, and yet I will, and I don't mean this shitty, I'm just being honest, I will never vote Democrat because I'm more concerned about my money.
All right,
my financial bottom line as a business owner. But when it comes to social things, I do think let people live. Yeah. Leave people alone, and everybody has different opinions on that. That's fine. But I'm just giving my perspective in the sense that you can't assume that someone's position, whether politically or anything else, that you know.
Oh my God, you are all over the place, Skip.
I know. Well, I'm just trying to bring together the reason why these words why this word itself, banal, came up, and then I went with the other ones because they all are interchangeable. And you'll see it now if you pay attention. You'll see these responses. You'll be like, oh, Skip was talking about those. I wonder, you know what? You're being trite. They're going to start throwing out them comments on the internet. Yeah, that's a banal statement. I got that big
word. Is trite or banal? Oh.
All right, we had one before we moved on to our topic or future listener questions that we have here. Just to kind of follow up on the leg stuff, we'll throw that in from Andy. He says, is it better to do piston type reps on every lift or just on squatting type movements?
Every lift for legs or just every lift in general?
I think every lift he means. And when he says piston type reps, does he mean what I imagine is he's talking about like a constant tension?
Yeah,
rep.
That's what I was touching on briefly. Is I am a fan of piston style reps. I don't think you should rest unless you're something like you're adjusting something fell off. You're to the end where you're not going to get another rep. Then you have to take in a couple breaths. So you're kind of taking the set a little bit further. Otherwise, you'd fail by taking that rest for 3, 4, or 5 seconds to get another couple breaths. I think they should be piston style reps because you're then not letting the muscle rest. You're arguably increasing the intensity by doing that. And it comes back to I was talking about those skinnier kids who were moving bigger weights where you wouldn't think they'd be moving them. And if they were doing piston style reps, or what I would term regular reps or regular sets, they wouldn't have gotten more than 4 or 5 reps without bottoming that thing out and being trapped underneath it.
Yeah. What do you think, Nate?
I mean, I usually always prefer constant tension, piston style rep, consistent repetitions, right? So like no walking out and that kind of stuff. But I'll say like I have used a lot of like stretch position where you like sort of pause in the hole, right? So like I like that for quads too, where like maybe I'll do a hack squat and sit in the hole for like 3 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, something like that. So that's
Yeah.
been a nice change for me too. Whereas you're not resting as long as you're not resting the hamstring on the calf, you know what I mean? But you're keeping that tension. And same with like chest press. Like sometimes I'll maybe sit in the stretch position, like I got that from Meadows, where he'll sit there, you know what I mean, do like a 3 second count and then go. So you're getting that stretch and the blood in there. But those are more like special repetitions, you know what I mean? Like you're not doing that
Yeah.
every training, right? So
I would say I'm with you guys 110%. The mistake I think I see happening often is once somebody gets into a rhythm with it, they start using momentum. There's like a centrifugal force that starts happening. I'm thinking of like a dumbbell row where so in that case, I'll tell people, and I thought of that, Nate, when you said like that stretch position. If I see somebody that's just like, they're just kind of like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it's just getting pumped out real quick, I'll tell them like, stop in the stretch, let it stop, make sure that you feel all the momentum removed, and then begin to pull. And then I think the key is making sure that you're still doing slow, controlled negatives. That's been the mistake I see, because I'm with you guys 100%. I'm all for constant reps through every set, and it takes a while to get used to that. And I think that if there's anybody listening who's not doing that and they switch, like your lifts are probably going to go down. Whatever you're lifting now, expect to do a little bit less.
right. No, it's tough. But like to touch on what you were just saying, Scott, is sometimes you see people, the first rep should look like the last rep. Essentially, it should be your goal. So sometimes, like you're saying about the one arm row, it's like, okay, someone might start with great tempo or speed or range of motion, but then it might like decrease as the set gets more intense, right? So like maybe they start speeding up the reps, you know what I mean? Which is obviously, we know that's a no-no, you know what I mean? But they might, I got to get 10, right? So, or whatever the number is. So then they start speeding up the, you know what I mean? Whereas like the first rep was like perfect, great,
Yeah.
nice control, but it's like that's part of like the mastery, like you were saying, and like acquiring that skill over time is like we get, like now I'm like a master at it, right? Because I started doing it 2 or 3 years ago, humbled myself, had to like relearn with new weight and really focus on my breathing, my control, being aware of like, oh, my rep speed has increased usually by the end of the set, right? Which is like, okay, I need to take note of that, go back to the drawing board, fix that, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. All right, so we had a question about site enhancement oil. And I think he was specifically asking about hyaluronic acid stuff. He says, oh, first of all, too, he's in the UK. He says, I often listen while driving up and down the UK as a long-distance truck driver and still manage to train 6 days a week, even after working 15-hour shifts at different gyms around the UK. I was wondering if you could discuss, he mentioned a couple brands. One of them I'm not familiar with, Metaform and Turboject. Have you seen these used for intramuscular site injections, for bringing up weak muscle groups, etc.? What is the mechanics behind this? And what's your opinions on it? And have you ever used it or told your clients to?
I mean, obviously, this is sort of like, a subject that some people are, a little shy about, but I'll be open and honest. I mean, I've never used hyaluronic acid or the water-based one, but I mean, I have honestly used SEO, like real oil, and I've noticed great benefits from it. I mean, obviously, the biggest thing is like, you need to be smart about it because it should not blemish your physique in any way, only enhance it. And I'll put it to you this way: I didn't do it until I turned pro, pretty much, and I've been competing for many years. So it's one of those things where it should be your very, very last resort.
Yeah.
And it's more of like a slight enhancement, and you really need to like know what the heck you're getting into, because it is sort of like crossing a new line, right? So but for me, I mean, I've used it in my biceps and honestly gotten great results, but it's one of those things you don't want to do all the time. Like, so for me, I'll usually start a prep at like 24 weeks out, use it all the way through. I do 3 cc's in each head of my bicep for like 6 weeks, and then I pulled back. That's another thing, is you need to be very mindful and intuitive with your body, meaning like I knew, okay, this is getting to be a little too much, so I pulled back to once a week, right?
Okay.
So you need to be very cautious of as that goes, because it can be sort of addicting because your arms are huge and pumped. You know what I mean? It's a great feeling, right? So,
You said 3 cc's. How often?
twice a week.
Twice
So
a week. Okay. And then went back to once.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, okay, this is getting to be a little bit too inflamed or
Yeah.
whatnot. So I sort of pulled back, because I know what the biggest thing is. You got to know what the muscle should look like. So when they start getting like blurred lines, like you see guys with like their splits, or whatever, they start getting like blurry or whatever, like in here. That's when, okay, getting a little bit too ahead of themselves. And I haven't done it consistently. Like, it's not like every prep I've done it.
Yeah.
But for 2 preps. This prep, honestly, for Toronto, I never touched it. So I think the biggest thing is you just have to be in a good headspace and know how, like, when and how to like pull back. Because a lot of guys, like we've seen in the past, it does become a little bit of addicting, and then they're like, it's like they're a little bit too far gone. And you're like, oh wow, you're looking a little lumpy, bro. Right?
Yeah, you kind of lose sight of what it's supposed. It's almost like a dysmorphia. You know what I mean? Where you can't see that it doesn't look good anymore. Yeah, I used it once, and I didn't really have that good of results. I used oil-based, and I honestly, I just didn't like all the shots, man. Like I didn't like it. I mean, I used the whole bottle. Don't get me wrong. I think it was like 100 cc bottle, so it's not like I quit real quick. But I used it into a show. I ran out at like a month out, and then I was just like, yeah, I'm going to leave it. So I did that once. I did use the hyaluronic acid product, one of them, once, and I wasn't a fan, but I followed it as it was directed. They said on the bottle you only needed like 1 cc per head once a week, and I tried that and saw nothing. So then I doubled it and still saw nothing. And then I doubled it and did that, I think, every other day. And I saw some level of volume, but it wasn't for me, the cost to benefit. And I don't even mean like the actual risks aside, just the amount of effort it took. Like it was not fun for me.
Yeah, it sucks. I mean, it's funny when someone says like, like you get someone new and they're like, oh, I hate needles or something. It's like, bro, we all do. Like, none of us like shit. You know what I mean? Like, so to add that into the mix, it's like, it's just, it's just not fun.
And it was like the day I would do it, I remember like I had like a table in front of me. It was just like, it looked like somebody was like doing a massive surgery. There's like just wrappers everywhere, and alcohol swabs everywhere, and all these different syringes. It was not for me. I did, and by the end, like I said, I quit, and I was like, yeah, we're just gonna live without this stuff. And that was the year that Judge told me after the show that what could I work on? He said better bicep peaks. Skip, your mic's still off. Skip, your mic's off. He put us on mute while he was making his shake.
I must have when I was eating those nuts and then forgot to go. Man, okay. I haven't been doing this very long. I'm new to this.
It's all right.
That's why when Nate's like this, I'm like, what? What am I saying? Anyway, I'm going to one up you guys, and I'm not doing this on purpose, but this was just relatively recent. It's about a month and a half ago.
Uh-oh.
I am fortunate because I have a wife who has been around for a long time with bodybuilding, and she, as much as she hates to give me my shot, she will do it begrudgingly, and she doesn't complain about it. But I found out very quickly that the volume that the recommended dosing and frequency was very, very underrated. I have very narrow clavicles, which means that I don't have great delts. I don't have great back width either, but whatever. I could go on and on about the things that aren't very great. Point is, I wanted to emphasize my side delts. I also wanted to balance out my left delt with my right delt because the one side is slightly bigger. So I went the 1 mil, and I said earlier, there's an art to this. You you have to learn what you're doing and where to put it and how deep to put it and how to change the depth and change the area so that you can kind of, it's like clay in a sense, and you're putting it on with the synthol quite a bit faster than you would put on muscle tissue. So you do want to get it right, or it is not going to look good. And then you have to back off, let it take time to dissipate and that sort of thing. Which I will say this too before I forget. I think there's a better look, especially if you're going into a show. You don't want to take it into the show. You
Yeah.
want to cut it back dramatically a few weeks before the show, because the look is better at that point when you have pulled back dramatically than it is if you're just to go in with that kind of inflammation. It depends on the muscle group and everything else too, but still.
I
So
would agree.
focusing on my delts, I was going rear delts, then all through the side delt. I had 2 days on, 1 day off, where each side was 8 pins at
Each
2 mil.
side. Oh wow.
So
So
yeah,
like high low?
no, they were all relatively high, but what it was I would have my wife space them. What happens at first is, in my opinion, you space them out so that they're relative, because you're, especially in the delt, you're kind of injecting, for lack of a better way to explain it, strands of muscle. Okay. So if you were just hit one and you hit, say, 3 mil, you'd have this very obvious strand that would be
Yeah.
enlarged. So what I did was I had my wife go about eighth of an inch, boom, 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 maybe quarter of an inch, I guess, maybe not an eighth of an inch, but quarter of an inch. And there were, then what would happen is after a couple weeks, there'd be what I called gaps. I called them gaps and strands. A strand would be where it might be a little bit more volumized, and a gap would be like fill the gap. So the gaps were important, and then it became. She said she laughed about a week and a half in. She goes, "Oh, I get what you're saying now. It becomes a little bit more random based on what
Yeah.
needs to be filled in to keep everything balanced." I'll be honest with you, I loved the look, and it looked great. In part because the delts are a funny thing, because mine are weak anyway. So it would take a lot of synthol for me to all of a sudden look like it ain't right. And here's the thing with the delts too that I knew going in, and I do not like front delt shots. They make me nervous.
Oh yeah. I don't like them either.
Yeah, I insist on doing those myself.
Do you?
Yeah, I
You can
do.
see it too. It's easy. It's right there, you know.
It's just very. But anyway, what you have to be careful with delts when you're using delts is, if I were to just put them in my side delts, then it would be probably obvious because my rear delts would be weak or my front delts would be weak. You have to balance out that area. And that's why when you get into bigger muscle groups like legs and things like that, it becomes hard, because I have done a lot of shots in my 40 years of training, my 30 years of gear, but I'm not going to put an injection into my medialis. I will hit my rectus femoris till I'm blue in the face. I'll hit my lateralis high and low. I'm not an anti-quad guy like Palumbo is, where, oh, there's so many nerves. No, I think a lot of people don't know where you need to go, because it's not the typical injection protocol that is so antiquated that's out there. You have to kind of get with someone like me, or someone who's been around for a long time that knows how to get around the quad shots so that they're not as tricky and they're not as jumpy and you're not hitting nerves. But anyway, the point is I was putting a lot in there and it was working really well. Here's the kicker though. And I know that someone out there is going to troll the shit out of me for this, because when I'm transparent and I'm honest,
Oh, they love
it
it.
helps out a lot of people. But then, I got to get these couple smart asses who want to jump in and say something negative. And that's fine, because I know I'm helping a lot of people by giving this information. But the inflammatory response was not good. And I should have known. I should have known. But I've used it before. I just haven't used it in a long time. What happened was the inflammatory response was so much. Think about it. This is a foreign substance.
Sure, a lot of it
Not
too.
an active drug, but it's a foreign substance. So when you're going 8, that's 16 mil on one side, it's 16 mil on the other, that's 32 mil. 2 days, that's for 1 day, 2 days straight. Then you go, you're off for 1 day, and then you go back 2, and it's just too much for your body. So I started to get a little bit of a swollen lymph nodes, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
this is not something that I want to battle right now while I'm in a caloric deficit, doing a lot of cardio, really looking good. Do I really need this? I really want it because it looks good. So my advice is this. I think part of the reason that you do want to start low and build in is so that your body can tolerate the increased dosing without it being so inflammatory.
I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see
Yeah.
that.
And I didn't jump up huge, but I started at 1 mil, but because it was 8, and then the next day I'm like, okay, I'll go 1 mil again, but then I'm like, I can handle way more than this. Not thinking, oh, I might have this inflammatory response. The other thing is, and I don't know how you guys do this, but I will not put gear. Like I was going into my shoulders with synthol, so I would not put gear in that area either, because normally I would.
Question.
I have weak shoulders, so I'm going to inject my gear, and especially if it's DHB, because it's going to inflame the area. I'm not stupid. So I don't mix the two.
Question.
I don't know if there's anything to that, but I don't mix them.
Is it oil-based SEO that you were using?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Okay,
oil.
just checking.
Yeah.
Shark oil. I hadn't heard of that one.
Yeah. And I don't want to give away, to be honest with you, the brand, because going back to the hyaluronic acid, this is why I'm not giving away the brand. I did touch base with the company, and I'm not in any way saying that they're unethical or anything. That's for other people to decide, just like I decided. But they have a hyaluronic acid option because they have 3 or 4 options for different formulas. And when I asked the question about how much hyaluronic acid was in it, it took a while for me to get the response, but I did get the response, and it's incredibly low, which I anticipated because hyaluronic acid is expensive shit. The hyaluronic acid, I think, if it's going to be at such a low percentage, it's just not even worth using it. What it does in theory is it pulls in water. It's almost the best way to explain it, just so that your brain can process it, is, and this is not what it is, but this is so that your brain can process this. It's almost like there are sponge particles in the oil that you're injecting, to where it pulls water in, so it volumizes more than if it didn't have the hyaluronic acid. You have a hyaluronic acid injection into your knee because you might have osteoarthritis because you injured your knee so bad through having damaged cartilage in 2020. That's a $1,500 injection. You go get hyaluronic acid in your face, like women do. It's expensive. There's no way around it. But what that does is it volumizes, because and I'm doing it with the lips. I don't know if hyaluronic acid is in lips or if it's in cheeks, or I don't know. That. But the point is it pulls water in to volumize that area.
Yeah.
So in theory, it's a great idea. I think it might be a little bit misleading if that percentage is so low that you give the implication to someone who is an overthinker like myself that you're using the fact that you have hyaluronic acid in the compound as more of a selling or advertising thing than it actually being beneficial. I think the percentage would need to be higher for it to be beneficial to actually pull more water in. I could be wrong. I could be, there may be someone out there who has a lot of experience with hyaluronic acid. Injections and everything else. No, it'll pull a lot of water, and maybe at a small percentage when you're hitting 8 cc's or 16 cc's in each delt, it will pull enough water to make it. That could be. I didn't go with that. I went with the regular formula, and it worked very, very well.
Right on. Question, kind of a follow-up then. We had somebody asking about tapering up in their cycles. So at what point, I mean, do you guys, first of all, do you, this so kind of follow-up question, but kind of tied in, Skip, you mentioned with the SEO, you felt like there was a benefit to not just laying it all on at once. If we're talking about a higher dosed cycle, would you rip it out the gate with a full dosing? Let's say it's over 2 grams. Or would you just rip that out?
It's not necessarily because of inflammation as much as it is that when your calories are higher coming into a prep, I would posit that you don't need as much gear at that point. I like to
I
increase
wasn't
the
even saying
gear
a
as the
prep
calories
though.
come down.
So it would be
Huh?
different for a prep for you then than an off season? Because I was just saying like
It
in
could be
general.
because it would depend on esters too. I mean, if you're in the off season, you're running long esters. It's going to take a while for blood levels to build anyway. So, from a drug standpoint, you may be able to start three long esters at once. You're doing primobolan and anthate. You're doing testananthate, and just because it's on the top of my head for some reason, Trenhex. I don't like the compound, but nonetheless, very long esters. It would take a while for blood levels to build. I mean, shit, those blood levels wouldn't peak for what 12 weeks, maybe. I mean, maybe longer than that. I'd have to do the math. But if it was voluminous shots of shorter esters and you're doing 4 grams of gear, yeah, I would probably then step things up too from an inflammatory response, because if you're pushing large amount of cc's, then yeah, you, especially if you're coming from nothing or TRT, you could have an inflammatory response. I mean, we want to be careful with health. I'm a little bit more careful because I'm older, far more careful than I was when I was, in my 30s and stuff. But and then recognizing if you have an inflammatory, I recognized it and decided that I needed to pull back because swollen lymph nodes were not exciting to me at that time, and they were, even though it may not have been causative. I did a couple things different at the same time that I started the synthol. The point was I had an inflammatory response that was pretty obvious. So was it causative and from the synthol? That I don't know, but it was definitely correlated. So that was enough for me to sit back and assess, instead of having that 30-year-old mindset where you're like, F it.
Yeah, just
I'm
push through.
gonna
You'll
jam
feel
as much
better.
stuff
You'll
as,
get used to it.
I'll deal with it later. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What about you, Nate? What do you think on this one?
I mean, I've always just sort of went right in. Honestly, for me, it's just I've been a good bodybuilder because I think I don't put too much thought into like stuff like that, because it's like at what point is there so much information that people are just like stressing out about it, I guess. Whereas I'm sort of a middle of the road kind of guy. There's some stuff that's important to me, and there's stuff where I'm like, I'm not going to overthink it because it just seems to work, and I like to be like pretty like stress free and not. I feel like I'm a good bodybuilder because I'm not like so over analytical with a lot of stuff. Whereas a lot of guys, I feel like they just get so stressed out because those are the guys that need to do everything perfectly. So like when it's not perfect, it's like, oh my god, the end of the world,
Yeah.
But you still come in with compounds later. Like you wouldn't start trend
Yeah,
at the beginning of
right. Yeah, yeah. So
or
I mean,
anything like that.
yeah, I mean, I would time it so like everything is sort of like in synergistic with each other. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But like, yeah, I mean, I know a lot of guys now are sort of like doing the titrate up, and like it's getting a little bit more fancy, I guess, as far as like cycles
Yeah.
go. But sometimes it just becomes like, oh, I'm this new coach. Here's my fancy cycle for you,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of like sparkly and shiny to some people that are new.
Yeah.
And is sort of
Yep.
my thought, I guess. So
Yeah, I could see that. There's so many different like selling points to being like, this is how I do things. It's different. It's better.
Yeah.
This is the thing that nobody figured out over 40 years of gear use,
Yeah, if I do it like everybody else, then
It'll
why
be
would I
banal.
do it?
You'll
I'm
be
just
banal.
doing exactly banal. I'm just doing what everybody else does. I have to do something different. Why would anybody want to work with me? That should be the conversation that more trainers should have with themselves. If I'm not doing anything different than everybody else, then why am I taking on clients? Maybe I should just let the people who are already doing it, deal with. Anyway,
Or get real good. Just get real
was-
good. Get them to hire you because you get people fucking peeled at their shows,
yeah, exactly. But you know what? There's a lot of trainers out there that are good that no one will know who they are. They can't find a niche. They can't, because there's just a lot of turds floating in that giant sea of turds.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, I've said before, I'll say again, I feel bad for anyone who has to come into the industry and is just standing there on the edge overlooking the kingdom going, who do I trust?
Yeah.
Like, who really knows what they're talking about? It has to be really a very uncomfortable. I've had people reach out to me, and one of the questions I ask new clients is, where did you hear about me? Do you know who I am? Did you know who I am? And a lot of times it'll be Elite FTS, it'll be the podcast, it'll be things that are predictable. Other times it'll be I came across your profile on Instagram a couple days ago, and I reach out. And I'm just like, holy, like you don't know any. And then you think, oh, I posted a picture a couple days ago.
Yeah.
That was the selling point. I mean, it's sometimes kind of.
I prefer that they know me. I like getting people.
Yeah, sure.
If somebody hires you from the podcast, they already know about skip loading. They know your personality. They get you, Right. And I remember it was a lot more work years ago when I didn't have, like, when people didn't know who I was, and I would still get clients, but they hired me because of like that, because they saw a picture, because they knew somebody that I worked with, something like that, or I happened to be in the right place at the right time. I get hired, and then there's a lot more questions versus now people are like, I hired you because I wanted to work with you. And that's so much easier,
Yeah, and just a little side note. You ever get someone who is I call it window shopping, and they'll actually say in the email, I'm reaching out to a handful of coaches, and I have some questions. Why should I work with you? What do you bring to the table? And it's funny 'cause I had one a couple weeks ago, and all I responded with is, we're just not made to work together. I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And he came back and he felt bad and he apologized. I'm like, you don't need to apologize. If that's how you're going to go about it, that's fine. But I'm not selling myself. I sold myself years ago. You either know who I am, you know my brand, you know my reputation, you know who I am and my methodology, and you want to work with me or you don't. I'm a prep guy. I'm not a salesman. I'm not going to talk you into working with me.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe I should work with this cat.
Did he hire you?
No. But we had a back and forth, and it ended up, I'm sure my response was probably, it wasn't rude, but I'm sure he knew how I felt about the approach that he used. So I don't hold it against him. I understand what he's doing. I mean, it comes back to what I was just talking about 5 minutes ago. If you don't know who you could try, I don't know. Maybe I'd be thinking the same thing. I need to talk to these cats and interview them. But I can guarantee you that if you're listening right now and you're thinking about doing that, the guy who's going to sell you the best is not going to be the best option out of the people that you are reaching out to. Guaranteed.
Yeah, I've said before when that's happened, they'll be like, oh, I reached out to you and this person and somebody else that I podcast with. And I was like, you know what? The guy that I podcast with, I was like, he's really good. You should hire him. Like he was asking me too, but he's like, yeah, I was talking to this guy and you. And I wanted to see, and I was like, okay, hire him. He's a good coach. Work with that guy, and that'll be good.
And that's an honest statement. I mean, be on the receiving end of that, I would have a lot of respect for somebody who would say something like that, and it may end up that's appealing, to that person. I don't know how you guys do it when you have clients, reach out to you. I like to be personable. It's one of the main things that I look to do, and the reason is because, like I said, there's a lot of trainers right now. And if I went back 15 years ago, even 20 years ago, I'll be honest, I was a little bit arrogant, but I was still honest. There weren't a lot of trainers that I had a lot of respect for. It was a pretty short list. These days, there are a lot of good trainers, and it sometimes can just come down to the rapport that you have, the parallels that you have with that person. Demographic. If an older client, maybe more find me more appealing because they have chronic injuries, things like that, things that I can relate to versus a 23-year-old. I'm always skeptical of those young 20-somethings when they reach out. But if they reach out and they say, I know you don't like working with kids, but I've been following you for a long time, and I know how experienced you are. Then I'm like, oh, shit, okay, I'm going to talk to this kid, and we'll see if we can do this. And I do have some that are young like that. It's just kind of the exception to the rule. But I'll tell you, sometimes the older veterans are more stuck in their shitty ways and are harder to work with than the younger kids who talk to their bros, and their bros say that, well, so-and-so Boston said to do it this way. I don't know if one's any worse than the other, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah,
The
that's
landscape
true.
has changed quite a bit. Andrew and I have talked about it. Scott, we've talked about it. The landscape has changed quite a bit, and there aren't very many soldiers left
Mm.
as clients. And it's just difficult. And as a trainer, you need to adapt to the landscape.
Yeah.
It just is. There's so much information out there that people are they they think they know more than they do. I think
Yes.
is what.
Yeah.
And someone may take offense to me saying that and go, "Well, you think you know more than you do." That's okay. I'll sit on my 40 years in this industry. I'll sit on the amount of clients that I've worked and my reputation that I've built. That's fine. You're not going to hurt me with that statement. But if you're not going to go back and even consider that you might not know as much as you think you know, you're not headed in the right direction.
It's our fault, Skip. Us as like all the education, like we are putting out education. That's the cool thing now. Like we've been doing this podcast since forever, right? And you were doing a podcast before that, sharing education, but now everybody is sharing something. Sure. They're teaching you something. This is my tip for this, or this is everything you need to know about Tren or whatever else. And so they everybody's heads are so full of all this information. And guess what too? They believe the stuff that's like the stuff that fits their agenda. You know what I'm saying? For instance,
it's their narrative, no question. But I'm not going to be honest with you. I'm not going to feel bad for putting out information when I have the experience.
Oh, I agree.
Like you said, we've done, what have I done? 400 podcasts between PED, maybe more.
Yeah.
I've written 300 articles for Elite FTS in the last 10 years. There's just so much there that I'm not going to feel bad for putting out the information.
No.
What I don't like is, and I know that's not what you're saying, but what I don't like is, or who should feel bad, are the people who are so convinced that they have so much experience and so much knowledge because they've been doing it for a couple of years, and they validate that by saying, well, I have clients coming to me. It's like, that doesn't... I've always said this. Your clients are always going to respect your knowledge because you know more than they do. You cannot know shit, but you know more than that client. When you know you've arrived as a good trainer is when your peers respect you. When you're respected by your peers. If I had people coming after me about, skip loading and everything else who are my peers, I'd have to sit back and go, oh shit. But you know who I have coming after me? I have Chris Williamson of the Modern Man podcast, who has 2 million followers and admits to his followers, oh yeah, when I was in my early 20s, I did a lot of stupid shit. I tried that skip loading, it didn't work.
You know what he's doing.
I don't even have to argue with that because you just admitted that you don't know what you're doing. You told a lot of people you have no idea what skip loading is, and you didn't work with me.
Yeah.
But that stuff is irritating. You look like part of the Funky Bunch. You literally, like, what kind of a physique? You're not in the bodybuilding industry. You have literally, like Marky Mark did that underwear shit, what, 25, 30 years ago? You just did it 12 years ago? I don't even want to, I'm not even going to justify this with a response to him publicly. I don't need, I guess
well, you just did
now. What's that?
I said you just did.
Exactly. But I had this topic not come up, it wouldn't have been something that I would have gone out of my way to, to confront or anything like that. My peers were to come after me, that'd be a different story. So
we had a guy go after Chris Tuttle. We did a podcast with him on It's Just Bodybuilding, and I asked him rapid fire questions, and I made that into a YouTube short. And the question was, what are your thoughts on the post show rebound? And his thought was, he was like, you know what, it's overblown. I said, is it overrated or underrated, I think? And he was like, it's totally overrated. You're in a position where you're coming off all the gear. You've been dieting for an extended period. Most of the time, what people end up doing is they get fat in that period of time, and they think that they're getting big until they realize they just put on a bunch of water and fat. And somebody came in to argue with him because this other person had listened to another podcast where he had learned a bunch of big words. What was the term exactly? Sarcoplasmic adaptations. Yeah, you're developing sarcoplasmic adaptations.
He must know what he's talking about using those big words.
Well, he heard it on a podcast, and guess what? Here's the thing, though, is that people don't want to hear what Chris Tuttle has to say if he's going to tell them something that's going to be against the narrative that they want to follow. Because guess what I want to follow? Guess what I want to believe? I want to believe that post-show I could gain 50 pounds of muscle. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I want. And if you tell me anything other than that, when somebody else said that I could, I'm going to argue with you that you're wrong. I don't care how many clients Chris Tuttle's had, whoever this guy is. People forget, Chris is a very well-respected coach who's been doing this for a long time. Like, people, like, that doesn't matter because you heard it on a podcast that you can do what you want to do.
Right. Agreed.
Whatever. Nate, we're happy to hang with you, man.
I'm pretty tired, honestly. Sorry.
That's all right.
That's all right. We appreciate you hanging with us. And if people wanted to reach out to you for coaching, speaking of coaching, how do they do that?
Just on Instagram at Nate Spear. Yeah, it's going really good, actually. This year has been awesome. So just really nailing guys. And for me, that's what coaching is like putting guys out on stage, like peaked and perfect and in top condition. And
oh, so that's what you meant by nailing guys. Okay. I'm glad that you clarified.
I was waiting, Skip.
Not
that was
that there's anything wrong with that, Nate. I'm not saying anything. I support that. That's your business.
Right.
That's right.
Cool. And you can go to teamskip.com. Reach out to Skip. Tell him that you're shopping around and you wanted him to sell himself on his coaching. Reach out to me, McNallyDiets@gmail.com. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thank you to TrueNutrition.com for working with us, guys. If you want to get some good deals and support our programming, you can go to True Nutrition. Basically, wholesale prices over there. Cut out the middleman. Shop with them. Get your protein powders, intra workouts, everything else. Use our code THINK. That's the only way for them to know that you support our programming. And of course, thank you to everybody from Patreon. I think we have a couple Patreon questions for the next episode, guys, for another episode of Blood, Sweat, and Gear with Skip Hill. We're wishing Andrew Berry the best of luck with his clients out at Junior Nationals. I've got a guy in Junior Nationals too. Shout out to Quinn. You're going to do amazing, man. And guys, if you see this, which this will be coming out, this will be coming out as Junior Nationals begins. And you look for Andrew Berry if you're in Tennessee and see if you can find him and say hello and get a picture with him and send it to us, guys. For another episode of Blood, Sweat, and Gear, we'll see you soon. Thank you. All right. Nate, you want to cut out of here, man? I don't know if you could hang with us for another episode. I think we got to put you to rest. All right, man.
Wake up and have energy, and then like the post-show fatigue just sort of comes and goes lately. It's weird, but I need to get some more naps in, honestly.
Yeah.
Curious, I was going to ask you on the show, but I forgot. Do you ever battle with narcoleptic issues after the show?
I have, yeah, definitely.
I remember one time I had this was early on, mid-2000s. I was talking to my boss, and I was working with kids in a residential treatment center. And she's talking to me, and there's kids all over me. And I was reclined in a chair, and I just went,
oh, God.
And she poked me on and she adored me. Yeah, she poked me on my shoulder, and I was like, what? And she goes, did you just fall asleep? I'm like,
oh, dude, that's the worst.
She goes, in my office. Went back to the office. I thought, oh shit, like I literally just fell asleep. I would fall asleep driving. I almost hit a cop one time because I started going off the road. It was horrible. Lasted about 2 weeks. And she asked me, she's like, what's going on? Like, what the hell? And I tried to explain to her, I just got done with the show a couple weeks ago. I'm having this really bizarre, reaction for the last couple weeks that anytime I eat, I can't, like, I literally will just fall asleep.
Yeah.
So she sent me home for the day, and she goes, when you come back tomorrow, you fall asleep again. And she goes, I love you. You do great work, and I will fire you. Because I was working with kids. I was working with kids that I controlled the floor. I was pretty much the HNIC and keep those kids safe. Those were adjudicated youth and kids who had been taken out of their homes for neglect and abuse.
Yeah.
And God forbid. I mean, I only had 14 kids, but still, I mean, you can't do that.
No.
So I just wondered if maybe, that, and I never had it again. I never had it. That was back in 2004.
Yeah.
Never had it again, but I remember it was vicious for a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks.
I'll say this time it's probably a little bit different because I've been training just as intensely because we sort of came off that show where I'm sort of in the mindset of like still being in prep. So normally I would have trained for like a week and then I would probably take a week off, you know what I mean? So that would have probably helped a lot, but I definitely need more rest time too because I've been doing a lot of stuff too and traveling, and it's like I want to train in these situations, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely probably need a little bit of extra rest here coming up.
Right.
So, yeah.
Hang in there, man.
You ever get a sleep study done, Nate, just to see with your size in the off season or anything if you have sleep apnea?
Honestly, I haven't, only because I feel like in the off season I actually don't really have too much of an issue.
Okay.
I seem to sleep pretty well throughout the night and feel fairly energized. And like this whole off season last year, I didn't really even nap during the day, so, and I felt pretty energized. And my ex-girlfriend of 5 years never really, I always asked her and she said, I don't know, you seem like you're fine,
You didn't snore and stuff.
Yeah, so
Okay. Well, just asking.
yeah.
I know that helped me a lot. I had a during prep, Skip. I remember like sitting in my car at a light, and because my attention, like I wasn't focused on anything, I didn't have to do anything. I'm just waiting. I'd start nodding out, wake back up. Oh God, the light's still red, thankfully.
And you get that little adrenaline surge because you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm good. Yeah, it's just not a good. With my swollen lymph nodes, I have been snoring. My wife is beside herself because I never snore. I don't snore the only time I snore is when I used to drink, but I haven't drank since 2010, and when I would get really big in the off season. But she goes, you're horrible. Like when you come to bed, I can't sleep. She has to sleep with her headphones on. I'll be honest with you. Are we live?
Yeah, we're still live.
Okay.
In fact, this is going to be like bonus stuff. I'm just going to let that episode keep rolling. They're still watching it right now.
Nice.
Okay, we'll leave it at that then.
Yeah, sorry. I'd say it privately, but I won't say it publicly.
Yes.
There are other issues going on with sleep. So
Okay, we'll leave it at that then.
yeah.
All right, gentlemen.
Appreciate you,
Have a
man.
good one, Nate.
Pleasure as always.
Yes, thanks for taking the time.
Of course. Talk to you soon.
See ya. All
I'm gonna
right.
end up bumping into him at Raw at some point, I'm pretty sure.
So you haven't checked it out yet, huh?
I haven't, but I am going to go up there because I'm going to start training legs up there on Wednesdays. I couldn't figure it out
Nice.
because my daughter and my wife, all three of us train together, which honestly is just so fucking awesome.
That is cool.
It's just the coolest fucking shit. But they don't want to go up there because it's a long way away. So I'm going to start training legs. It's only about 45 minutes.
Okay.
But what it is everything, the other gyms are so close and they do work well. So they don't see the appeal in, like I do, of being around and bumping into people from a business standpoint. But the leg equipment is going to help me too, because of course, I still have to be careful with my, with my back and stuff like that. One of the things that I didn't get to say about the leg training is that's the one thing that has hurt my leg training the most is my, that vulnerability with my lower back. The only reason I have been injury for one of the main reasons is because I'm not pushing the poundage. I can't.
Okay.
Poundages that I used to be able to push. I think I told you that I had that slight issue about 5-6 weeks ago, and I got lucky for that. But I just did the same thing. I was literally we're still live. Let's just say I twisted the wrong way.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, that feels a little bit tight, and then was fucked. Like I had a hard time getting out of bed the next morning, and then trained that night. Like it was fine. Took a couple ibuprofen. It's weird. It's different in the sense that it's nowhere near the level it was before, but I'm having slight tweaks that are pretty rough, and then they're gone within 16, 18, 24 hours. It's just weird. It's
weird.
Bizarre.